Hi, students. It's Dr. Newmark. We are going to jump into the week 6 presentation. And so without further ado, here we go. Okay, so today I'm going to talk exclusively about Roland Barthes' short book, Lucida. I'm mostly going to focus on section 1, although I may say a few things from later in the book. We'll see how it goes and how long this video is going. Okay, so first of all, here we have a picture of Roland Barthes. He looks like a very sort of cosmopolitan Frenchman, which he was. So in this particular book, which is one book out of many that he published, he's a very well-known philosopher. So he's very interested in exploring whether photography has a genius of its own as an ontological question. So the photograph mechanically repeats what could never be repeated existentially. And here on the screen, I have the cover of his one edition of his book, and then a photo that he discusses, which is of Napoleon's brother. And this photo made a strong impact on Roland Barthes and kind of propelled these ideas he has about permanence, memory, ontology, epistemology, and just these general existential questions vis-a-vis the advent of the technology of photography. This is so laden with an emotional dimension regarding how we conjure our experience or our relationship to memory and how photography plays into this general dynamic between memory, self, past, and future. So I wonder, looking at this image here of Napoleon's brother, because of photographs' profusion over time, and particularly, I think it's so important to reframe this question based on the era of the superabundance of photographs in which we live. So because of the profusion of photographs and their odd ephemerality today, have photographs lost their look-see quality, what Barthes called their pure deictic nature? So in fact, if these photographs in their very nature ask one to view them, they are establishing this relationship between the artifact of the photograph and the viewer. Have they lost that quality because the very nature of their ephemerality has changed? So if we think of sort of paper ephemera, which I've always been really fascinated with, like letter writing paper or newspapers or wrapping paper, if we think about a photograph, either in its negative or in its printed version, and we're thinking about old photographs here, not ones just made of pixels that exist as data on our phones or our computers, but the old photographs, they had a certain kind of ephemerality, even though they weren't necessarily intended to be ephemeral originally, because they did take a lot of labor to create and investment of time and materials and other resources in order to produce. I don't know if any of you have ever spent any time in a dark room, like developing photographs by hand. I remember we did this in high school and it was really fascinating, but it takes a lot of infrastructure in order to enact that process, to move the photograph from the action of capturing a subject on film with a camera to transitioning that to a printed piece that a person can hold in their hand. So there's a whole sort of system of actions that are in play in that process, and it's really interesting to think about. And our experience with digital photography today, as we consume them rapidly, and I'll call to mind again that statement about consuming information in a state of distraction, stemming back to Berger. We do that today with photography, but that is not how it's been for most of the years in which photographs have been a part of our culture. So for a long time, because they were such a rare form of like a memento or a capture of a moment, they did have this look-see quality. And I would ask you whether we've lost that. We've lost that today. So there's a picture on the screen of my grandmother, and my mother and my two kids. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit here. So a photograph is always invisible. It is not it that we see. So when I'm looking at this photograph on the screen, which was taken about 10 years ago, and it's interesting that my son, who was a toddler here, is looking at an iPad in this photo. And it's actually surprising to me that he's doing that because I'm pretty limiting in terms of access to technology for my kids, like screen time is in common parlance. But for some reason, whatever was happening at the moment in this photograph, I let him watch something, and I could zoom in on it and see what it was here. It could be like a Montessori game. I'm not sure what it is, but we have my infant daughter here. She in this photo was, I think, 4 months old, and we had gone to Montana for my grandma's birthday. And she was, let's see, she was probably 93 in this photo. So anyway, Barthes establishes a difference between capital P photography and the photograph. He does not want to reduce his own or others' photographs to photography, capital P. What does this mean? Like, go back and look at that. What is this differentiation between the two terms? So he feels that established discourses, sociology, semiology, psychoanalysis, and that's misspelled there, sorry about that, just aren't right for a discussion of photographs, because all of those systems are reductive systems, and he doesn't think that that's right for an analysis of photography and the ontology of photography. So the three intentions or practices in photographs are under the consideration of Barthes, and these are the operator, the spectator, and the spectrum. So the latter term recalls the terrible fact that photographs signal the return of the dead. So in this photo, as I told you, there's actually 4 generations represented if you include me as the photographer on the other side of this photo, the person performing the action of clicking the button to photograph it. But my grandmother is no longer alive. She died a few years ago at age 98. So I had actually forgotten about the existence of this photo. So not only does it capture someone who's no longer alive, my grandmother, it sort of reconstitutes or reintroduces me to a memory that I didn't know that I had. And so many things are transitory and ephemeral indeed, like my children's status at the ages that they were. My son is no longer a toddler. My daughter is no longer an infant. My grandmother is no longer alive. And some of you know this, my mom photographed here. She has Alzheimer's, so she's no longer sort of the woman that she was here in the same way that she was in this photo. So we have this capacity for photographs to perform this sort of fascinating resurrection in that they call to mind previously existing presences or forms. And in that way, they have this spectral quality. That's why he calls it the spectrum here, the return of the dead. I could say more about this photo, but again, we will move along. So when one is aware of being photographed, one transforms into an image through posing. And so I just included this from Shutterstock, a person taking a photograph of 3 friends, presumably, and they are posing for the camera. Now we see this act become one that is embodied in the self when people take a selfie, like with their phone. They look at it, they may array themselves in a certain way. This has become a phenomenon, indeed, like a pretty ubiquitous act in our present day society, and it's become parodied and mocked. I mean, there's all kinds of discourse around how we array our bodies for being captured on film, even by ourselves. And something interesting is I love to volunteer at my kids' school picture day. Throughout elementary school, I would always volunteer on picture day and go in and help the little kids make sure that they were ready to have their picture taken. As you can imagine, for kindergartners, sometimes their hair was all over the place, or maybe they had lunch on their face, or maybe they had PE right before their picture day. So I volunteered for picture day just yesterday. And so it's interesting, these kids today who are very accustomed to being photographed, there's something different. There's a different layer of becoming an image when it is a school picture and it's in a very formal setting. What we see on the screen here is like presumably a casual setting, but people are still posing. But the presumption is here, they're all out hiking, like you can see, and they've stopped at this vista for a photo. But in the school photography setting, it's like they're in the gym, there's a backdrop, there's a photographer, the kids are dressed up nicely for school picture day. But nevertheless, they are having to take on a different presence to transform themselves into an image for someone else, presumably their parents or their loved ones. And are they able to enact a sort of like rhetorical move in the arraignment of their body before the camera lens? So speaking of Barthes again, how does he differentiate between how he is presented and what he feels about being presented in a photograph, as opposed to in a painting or in a drawing? So he writes, the photograph is the advent of myself as other. This should set off bells in your head that refer you back to Berger. Very interesting how we think of ourselves as other. I actually think that the superabundance of social media has caused this sort of phenomenon to metastasize, viewing oneself as other. It's really accelerated that phenomenon in some very problematic ways. As I say here, how might we understand this statement in the social media era? Do we even think about the technologies by which these images are rendered, where they exist in cyberspace, by whom they are possessed, if by anyone, and who we are in each quickly captured digital photograph? Do we look at ourselves when we look at digital images? And I apologize for the fact that we have some background noise if you can hear it, because that is my dog barking. Okay, so concepts of photography and ownership, of turning a subject into an object, these are all very evident in Barth's work, and they harken back to Berger, don't they? I would say, rhetorically. And then he introduces this concept of photography and death. That is everywhere in this book. So many profound ideas concerning the mechanical reproduction, the imprinting of self and other, of personhood, and indeed of land, of scape and of landscape. So we have here this famous photo by Stieglitz called The Terminal. He discusses this in the book as well. And he writes about cameras and time and their mechanical facility and their clicking. So Barthes refers to them as clocks for seeing. What do you make of this? I love this idea that photographs are clocks for seeing. I want you to think about that. Indeed, perhaps even pause the video and think about what that means, clocks for seeing. So photography is an uncertain art, a science of desirable or detestable bodies. And I continue to assign this book because as we move farther and farther into the perverse domain of digital image capture and manipulation, I think it's especially germane to consider photography as an uncertain art, a science of desirable and detestable bodies. What does that mean? And do we only mean bodies in the corporeal sense? So here we have two images. One on the right is of me and my kids just this last year, the day after Christmas in Paris, in front of the newly reopened Notre Dame. And then a photo by Jules Germain Courtelemont, I guess, in my very bad French, from a National Geographic image collection from the 60s. And this is also of the Notre Dame Cathedral. So what has digital photography, the superabundance of images and the ease with which we all capture images and manipulate digital space, such as in Canva, or in posting photos we snap quickly to Instagram and adjusting the filters, or using the background eraser tool on our phones. So what has digital photography done to the mechanisms or even the art of photography? Are we unable to perceive its power? Like, can you, as a consumer of images, differentiate between which photographs are art and which are just sort of disposable pixels on your phone. When it's time to free up space on your phone and you delete photographs because they take up a lot of space, maybe you upload them to the cloud and you don't have this problem. Where do they exist? Do they exist anywhere? It takes on this whole other dimension of sort of spectrality, as I was discussing in a previous slide. So Barthes writes, one can either desire the object, the landscape, the body it represents, or love or have loved the being it permits us to recognize, or be astonished by what one sees, or else admire or dispute the photographer's performance. So this photo on the right, as I have mentioned many times, we were living in Finland last year, but we came back to the US. We started our trip on Christmas Day. We needed to come back to New Mexico to visit my parents who are elderly, and I mentioned my mom's health condition. And so because I booked the travel late, we had to fly through Paris, and my kids were very interested in checking out Notre Dame to see how it had been reconstructed, rebuilt since its the devastating fire. So this was just a quick snap. We didn't go in. I didn't know, about getting tickets for entering the church. Of course, it was a zoo because it had only been reopened for a few weeks, but you can see some of the evidence of the fire in the left side and the right side of this photograph. You see these cranes, you see scaffolding on the left. So it permits us to recognize certain things. And the photographer in this case was my husband. And I think those relationships on either side of the camera lens, the agentive nature of the people performing certain tasks on either side, there's a certain level of labor communicated in this photograph on so many levels. But so that this video isn't so long, I will stop this conversation there. But if you think about the relationship between this professionally done photograph on the left and my just casual quote unquote snapshot on the right, there's a lot that you can kind of probe about this phenomenon. So to Barthes' point, while photos are not animate, how do they animate us? So they are static in this regard. Although your phone might have these little tricks where it takes a lot of photos you've taken and it'll do automatic things to them, like turn them into GIFs or turn them into little slideshows. So in that way, they are animated, but that is not the real double entendre he's working with, or I'm working with animating us and things being animate. Okay, so the studium and the punctum. These are two words from this text that you will see if you continue on in the study of sort of material rhetorics, or this kind of philosophy and cultural studies in this vein. You will come across them again. So I included some images that I got from the Aesthetics of Photography website that attempted to make these terms a little bit more decipherable. So the studium is ultimately always coded. The punctum is not. The punctum is what I add to the photograph and what is nonetheless always there. So he has some examples later in the book of photographs that don't quite prick him with a certain punctum because the emphasis was decidedly put there by the photographer. The punctum is not something that was decidedly or deliberately put there by the photographer. It's more of an accidental inclusion that only gains its significance through the relationship between that photograph and a certain viewer. It's always there, but it gains its weight through a certain relationship. So we have these images here. You can take a screenshot of this, or you can go to this website and see these for yourself. The differentiation between operator, spectator, and spectrum, and then studium and punctum. I've had a lot of students write about studium and punctum in the past, and I want you to be sure that you get them right, at least as they relate to this particular reading. And in fact, I've used these terms in some of my theoretical scholarship. And I remember I was giving an online presentation last year, and a senior scholar, more senior than me, told me that he understood punctum a little bit differently than I did. So these are terms that people will know, and not that my interpretation was wrong, but it had a different inflection than this other scholars. So I would just encourage you to be clear on how you're using this term, what it means to you and what it means vis-a-vis this work of Barthes and other people's work that has come after his. So what I would like us to discuss relative to this information that I've shared in the video today and this content is the crux of all of this. So like, how is photography used in technical communication today? And how does this differ from historical usages? Like, what was photography for at its very moment of creation as a technology? So we use it today, again, to use the term mindless or mindlessly. We use it mindlessly. We use it in a state of distraction. We use it as a tool. I just used my phone like 20 minutes ago to photograph something, and then I used Cam Scanner to turn it into a PDF, something for my kids' school. So I used the device of the photography app on my phone as a tool to perform a certain task, which I could have done a different way, but I did it that way. I transferred something that existed in hard copy into a digital file to transmit via another means of digital communication, email, or I dragged it to upload it somewhere. So in technical communication, photography would be presumed to be used for a certain reason. I will let you answer this question, but I have my own answers to this question. And I'm inserting technical communication into this conversation relative to this question because we haven't discussed photographs in this presentation today that have anything to do with technical communication. They've been to preserve a historic moment or to capture the way a building looked, or in the photograph of my grandmother, my mother, and my kids, it was a family moment. It was meant to preserve something in time that meant something specific to us. But in technical communication, is that how photography is used? I'll leave that to you to tell me about. So can you find any examples that have aspects that resonate with Barth's ideas? And when I ask you this, I mean like these, there goes my dog again, I apologize for that, from your own digital photography archive or your like hard copy digital photography archive. I mean, I'm just looking at my desk right now. I have pictures taped to my monitor next to my desk. I have photos everywhere. I'm surrounded by them. How indeed do they function in your world, in your life? Do any of your engagements with these resonate with Barth's ideas? And on that note, I'm going to end this video, and I'll be really excited to hear your thoughts on the questions that we have here. So on that note, have a great rest of your day.